Thanks for tuning in to another edition of Another Dolphins podcast. Every day it feels more and more like football season. The Miami Dolphins have been trimming the roster down, starting in training camp. Actually, before then, Josh, starting in free agency in March. The Dolphins have built a 90-man roster that has been trimmed down to 53 players as we are just a week away from the Jacksonville Jaguars. Before we get into all the news, notes, action, and what you need to know for your fantasy team, how you doing today, Josh?
I'm doing good, Jake. It's day 2 of now having 2 children in school, so I'm getting used to that. It's kind of back to school for me, so to speak. But dude, if we were not prepared for if you weren't ready for football to start this cut down day, it's time now, right? We hear the Jaguars; they're now right in that rear view mirror. Objects appear closer than they seem. They're right on our tail, man. So football's back. 12 days now. I think we're recording this on what? Is it Monday? Tuesday. Tuesday.
Tuesday.
God.
It's kind of the thing, man. That's you reach the point in the calendar where football games kind of help you dictate the week. We got Monday Night Football. Bumble through a couple days. You got Thursday Night Football to save you up. Oh, you made it to the weekend. Here's some college football to get you to Sunday and football season, man. So it's just great to be back. It's great to get to the swing of things and to downward spiral this podcast right away. Let's get into the injuries to start, Josh. Players announced on the physically unable to perform list to begin the year for your Miami Dolphins, Josh: Bradley Chubb, Cameron Good, Isaiah Wynn, and Odell Beckham Jr. Where do we begin?
I mean, probably Odell Beckham, right? I didn't know if you were trying to set me up to go elsewhere. I mean, I'm excited to see, maybe Isaiah Wynn back mid-season. We're going to get Bradley Chubb back. But Odell Beckham Jr., man, we have to start there because, he's that marquee name. He's that big signing that, whether you're a Dolphins fan or not, that's that name that really jumps out on paper to you. So we thought he's going to be that wide receiver 3. We're slowly seeing the evolution and thought that what to expect with him and Mike McDaniel's offense. But it seems like we got to wait another 4 weeks, Jake. So what are your early thoughts, and how do you think this changes the Dolphins' offense throughout those first 4 weeks?
This was something that was kind of the tough thing, man. It's not even tough. It's just weird. It's unique about football, but you get the sense there's PR statements that go out, and it was like 3 guys from NFL Network who all kind of tweeted out the same thing. And this was from Tom Pelissero. The team knew when it signed OBJ in May that this was a possibility due to an off-season procedure that he had. He's worked hard to get back, but ultimately the team felt the best path for him was to spend a few more weeks to ease him into game action so he'll be healthy for the duration of the season. Josh, when I read that comment, it felt exactly like what they did with Jeff Wilson last year. That was another one where what was it? I think a ribs and a pinky injury popped up for Jeff Wilson kind of out of nowhere, and I think his agent kind of came out and said he'd be good to go. I think what's going on here is that Odell Beckham Jr. obviously isn't ready to play. A little frustrating, a little disappointing, but Josh, I think the biggest thing here, what's really important to keep in mind, is that they got Odell Beckham Jr. because they were struggling late in the year. This was a team that ran out of answers. Something that's been very clear since Mike McDaniel arrived in Miami. This team can start fast. 3-0 to begin each of the last 2 seasons. It's frustrating. We want Odell Beckham Jr. to be out there, but man, to be completely honest, we need him in December. We need him in late November. In September, man, let the speedsters do their thing.
Yeah, and I mean, we're all upset. I guess on Twitter, a lot of people are upset. People are going after Odell Beckham Jr., which is absolutely, yeah, they really are, which is absolutely ridiculous. But the way I look at it, and Jake, this might be dating myself, and maybe, you might not get this reference, but it goes back to when I was a kid. Maybe your parents couldn't afford that wrestling ring or whatever, but they could put it on layaway. They could pay increments on it, and eventually they'd get him. So we knew when we signed him, right? We were only paying $3 million opposed to what he got last season. So there was a little bit of a bargain on the Dolphins end, and now we're going to get Odell Beckham Jr. back, 4 weeks at the earliest, and he's going to be that wide receiver 3 that's going to change his offense. I mean, I think we have talked about it. Devon Achane, Jonnu Smith is really going to be those 2 guys that evolve this offense, but bringing in Odell Beckham Jr. then as well, 4 weeks down the road, 6 weeks down the road, whatever it is, how the defenses, game plan for that. So maybe it's a blessing in disguise once we're talking about this, 6 weeks down the road. But when you just lost River Craycraft, when Eric Ezukanma's in a boot, when there's so many other injuries, not what you want to hear about your wide receiver 3, despite Odell Beckham Jr. being the age that he is.
Yeah, man, I'm really excited early season to see what they have in store for Devon Achane, for Jonnu Smith. We mentioned it before, but Nate Dice did a really interesting deep dive about how the Dolphins were using their tight ends in motion. So this isn't really something like this isn't we learned today that Odell Beckham Jr. got injured, right? This is something that the Dolphins have prepared for, they've been thinking about. So I'm really interested to see, like you said, how this is going to be a progressive chess match throughout the entire year. That starts with maybe let's get Devon Achane a couple receptions and Jonnu Smith, and then evolve progressively, get to the Odell Beckham Jr. in situations like that.
Saying that, Jake, just though I'm putting a positive spin on it, at the same time, we continue to hear Tua Tagovailoa saying nothing can replicate going out there and running those routes together. So yeah. I'm sitting here saying we put it on layaway. You're not getting that wrestling ring right out of the box. You might have to assemble it first and get things going before we see the Odell Beckham Jr. really clicking in this offense. So I just want to throw that out there. Homer Houtz had to look at it from a negative perspective as well.
Bradley Chubb, he suffered his season-ending leg injury about a month later than Jalen Phillips did. Now, we know that Jalen Phillips, it's awesome to see him back in practice. It seems like he's going to be around and available for week 1. The PUP list for Bradley Chubb, no surprise. The PUP list for Cameron Good, no surprise. But Josh, just real quick here, Isaiah Wynn, this is someone who went 700 snaps, I think it was, without allowing a sack last year for the Miami Dolphins. He was one of the first signings they made in free agency, trying to shore up the offensive line. Are you surprised to see someone like him land on the PUP list?
I mean, kind of, because didn't the Dolphins sign him kind of early, and it almost seemed like maybe they had a plan for him to, come in and be part of that starting rotation or at least battle for it. And, then he was put on PUP list. So again, that's one of those players that I thought looked decent when he was playing at guard, showed some nice things. He's a little bit younger than some of these other guys on the roster. So I have no issue with it. Thinking about, the 13 different interchangeable offensive lines we used last season. Jake, what are your thoughts on Bradley Chubb, though? We just touched on a little bit. We all kind of knew he was going to sit there, but the guy had 11 sacks last year. We know how unfortunate the injury was at that time during the game, but bringing him in during, the gritty part of that year, when we have playoff implications on the line, that's definitely a huge, huge boost, even if it isn't the same Bradley Chubb that we saw last season.
Dude, Bradley Chubb was a monster when it came to forced fumbles last year. I think we all love to see, you take down the quarterback. You love to see that pressure. But, man, he had a couple of games where I think it was multiple forced fumbles. And just that ability to change the game on a dime is so important. And I think he's been one of the most underrated Dolphins in the last couple of years. He arrived in Miami after he had his entire professional career in Denver. He had to pick up his entire life. I think he broke his hand right away. He was dealing with another injury. And then just to deal with the bad luck again last year, man, I'm really excited to get someone like Bradley Chubb back in the fold. He's one of Miami's highest paid players. And people see that and expect, like, man, he should be one of the top 5 players in the entire NFL. And there's such a middle ground there where I think Bradley Chubb's been a little underrated in his time in Miami. So it'll be great to get him back, hopefully 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. Maybe you're kind of playing with Miami's bye week a little bit to really ramp up Bradley Chubb. But I'm feeling relatively confident. You have Jalen Phillips back, Emmanuel Ogbah re-signed, and then Chop Robinson, Mohamed Kamara still floating around. So Josh, how you feeling about that group in general?
Yeah, Quentin Bell as well, right? And I think Channing Tindall, I don't know. I don't think he officially moved to edge, but we saw him coming off the edge a lot during, preseason. So, I am intrigued to see what he can bring to this. And I like that you said he was underrated, because at one point I think a lot of us may have thought he was overrated. A lot of people were down on that trade, because he was banged up. They weren't taking in that, human element to this. He's completely uplifting his entire family, learning a new system, broken hand, during a bye week. So, getting him back again, Jalen Phillips back, having that defense all come together, ecstatic to see what comes along, because, again, man, on paper, this looks like one of the better Dolphins teams that we've seen in forever.
Moving on with the injuries, Josh, Cam Smith. He will be placed on injured reserve with the hamstring injury that came up during camp. It's been a little bit of an interesting day here, Josh. We're going to start mixing in some of the cuts here, so please bear with us. Jason Maitre cut. Nick Needham, that was a gut punch to see, cut. Isaiah Johnson, another cornerback, rookie cornerback that was cut. Now Cam Smith going on injured reserve, man. This defensive back group, a couple days ago, we were feeling pretty excited about it, but all of a sudden, maybe not so much.
Is it too early to say in Storm Duck we trust? I mean, is that where we're at this point? I mean, they also got rid of Nick Needham, right? I don't know if we're kind of spiraling here because we're just getting dumped on this. The news dumped on us, dude. Cam Smith on IR, that kind of hurts. But we got to remember, and I think you did mention it, they can bring 2 players back during the year from IR. So hopefully that doesn't stun his growth. But man, that was what our second round pick, our only pick a few years ago, and you thought promising things, and he's just it's always something. So hopefully he can get back out there because this sucks.
I don't want to read too far into this, and I apologize to anyone who's listening to this and the information already came out. But Josh, it used to be a rule where players who were going to go on injured reserve, they would have to be on Miami's initial 53-man roster for at least one business day, which sounds really dumb, but you kind of got to draw the line somewhere. But that rule's been changed, and now players placed on injured reserve before the season starts, I believe it's 2 of them can come back after a minimum of 4 games. You'd have to assume, and I know what happens when you assume, Josh, and I won't lump you in with me here when assuming, but River Craycraft and Cam Smith make sense as those 2 guys that would likely be coming up. And on top of that, Craycraft hasn't even been put on IR yet, but that's kind of where it seems like things are headed.
Yeah. So, I mean, I hope he can get him back. I mean, again, this is not what you want to hear when you're sitting here talking about Nick Needham being cut, which I guess they wanted to try to bring him back on the practice squad and things like that. And then wide receiver, like you said, Jake, if you can get River Craycraft back, those 2 guys mid-season, it just sucks that we don't have them right now. When we have a need at corner, when we have a need at receiver, that we don't have those guys to rely on because, we were starting to see some promise in Cam Smith. He looked decent. What was it? Not this last preseason game, it was the one before that. He looked pretty promising out there going against Scary Terry and a couple of those Washington Commander receivers.
Yeah, man, that was his breakout performance against the Commandos, and like we've been talking for the last few weeks, the secondary battle's been the most fun to watch. We gotta sit and talk about Nick Needham for a second because I think he really is just the definition of what we all love about sports. This is someone who came in undrafted and he just fought. Right, those Dolphin teams, man, he was out there when the Dolphins were getting absolutely torched throughout that 2019 season, and there were no excuses. He was someone that just fought. So Nick Needham provided with us a great story to follow for a couple of years. It's a bummer to see him go, but we wish him the best. And Josh, you mentioned that I think the Dolphins are interested in bringing him back on the 16-player practice squad, but he's another guy who might even get some interest around the leagues where for players to be eligible for the practice squad, they got to make it through waivers, and Nick Needham might be someone who gets a little bit of attention from around the league.
And with everything going on right now, Brian Flores would probably just pick him up just to be a dick, right? Probably put in just that waiver claim just to be a jerk. And I sat there and said, in Storm Duck we trust, but I forgot Ethan Bonner, right? He's supposed to be that, next, taking that next step. So someone needs to rise to the occasion because just a few days ago, we sat here and we were looking at this, cornerback, this secondary, thinking, okay, it's not as bad as we think. And now, injuries are cut here. Now you're like starting to feel a little queasy, but I guess it's just 'tis the season for that.
It all looks a little different once we see him out in the field. And it looks a little different because we just saw these guys playing so many snaps throughout the preseason. But in Butch Berry, we trust. In Anthony Weaver, we trust. I think that's it for injuries, Josh. So let's go through some of the bigger cuts we've seen so far. Starting with Mike White. That was one of the first players that was released by the Miami Dolphins. And of course, it came shortly after we did a podcast. But Josh, the Dolphins made the decision to go with Skylar Thompson as QB2. I think Mike McDaniel said it best. The players just responded more when Skylar Thompson was out in the field. And you can kind of understand why when you have Mike White dropping a stat line of 4 for 14.
Yeah, and the ball looked like it just had more pop to it when Skylar Thompson was out there. So I think they were speculating that maybe you could get Mike White back on the practice squad. But, I mean, that's a guy that we sat here and thought could compete for QB2 and, maybe come in if whoever, God forbid, something happens. So I am just hyped that Skylar Thompson rose to the occasion and that, now they're developing him. This is third year in Mike McDaniel's system. He was out there rocking the sleeve and he made some decent throws that, if Tyreek Hill was out there, Jalen Waddle was out there, who knows what could have come. So hopefully we never see him in live action again, but I like what we've seen from Skylar Thompson year after year enough to at least warrant him being QB2. And that's it.
Jody Fortson, another player that the Dolphins decided to move on from. Josh, I loved him for being this big body red zone target who can really be a difference maker, maybe like a special ace inside the 20-yard line, just that. Former Miami Herald reporter Armando Salguero used to have a saying where there'd just be a tight end all alone open in the end zone, and Jody Fortson felt like he could be that guy for the Dolphins. However, you do wonder if he kind of felt like maybe a one-trick pony at times, and maybe the Dolphins wanted a little more versatility from their tight ends.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of this is maybe that they've already invested time in Tanner Conner. I mean, I don't think that we still, as we're typing this, right, I don't know that we still have an official depth chart listed, but the Dolphins had some tough decisions to make at tight end when, coming into the year, we weren't even sure what was going to happen. So Tanner Conner, we know Julian Hill's almost a lock. So I think it had more to do with Tanner Conner, but who knows? Another one that really stood out to me, Jake, and we were talking about offense, but I want to shift over to the defensive side. And we were talking about the edge and some of those guys, defensive line. Neville Gallimore was already counted at 1.79 million against the cap. He looked okay in camp, right? I mean, 2 tackles, 1 sack. It looked like a guy that, based on coming out of school, what he has done in the past, that maybe the Dolphins were giving him a chance and maybe, could possibly be a nice depth piece, but that's not the case. Dolphins got rid of him. Could be practice squad worthy. Were you surprised by Neville Gallimore? Because that was that name that, originally had me sit up in the chair, that type of meme, like, oh, what are the Dolphins doing now?
I love that, Josh. And you kind of, I don't know if you did it on accident or purpose, but you kind of summed up why I think the Dolphins moved on from him. You said he looked like a guy, and that's pretty much it. I don't think he really did anything to stand out here. This is someone, I think, for 2 reasons, we thought, all right, this is going to be one of the players, and, one of the best sayings in sports that everybody sounds like a genius when they say it. We lost this player, but we can make him up in the aggregate, right? And we're going to make up Christian Wilkins in the aggregate with guys like Neville Gallimore. You consider a former 3rd-round pick. He spent 4 years with the Cowboys. He could come in and provide you something. You can't get something from nothing, Josh, and the Dolphins weren't really seeing a lot from him. And I don't know about you, man, but the comeback story of Benito Jones, Brandon Peely in his 2nd season, we know about the physical freak he is, and Deshaun Hand, those are guys I'm really interested in, and I'm pretty comfortable seeing those guys line up next to Calais Campbell and Zach Sealer. So, very strange, somebody who's has such a close to $2 million in guaranteed money. Very strange for Miami to move on to someone in a situation like that. But at the end of the day, man, I think that's just a ringing endorsement for the guys like Brandon Peely and Deshaun Hand, who are just coming in and instead of, letting other people get jobs, they're just taking jobs.
Yeah, and I think it's a testament to, Mike McDaniel and the staff. They always say, that it's a battle and let the cream rise to the top. But, Neville Gallimore looked like almost a lock at one time for the 53-man roster. And now he's on his way out. Another guy, I don't know how you felt, Jake, but I was kind of surprised by this one. Curtis of House Bolton. I had to make sure I use that nickname, but there were times when we all thought he might, supplant Channing Tindall. Channing Tindall might be in the unemployment line because of how he looks. So he had 6 tackles in the finale, 11 total. Looked like a solid player in the inside on that linebacking course. So were you surprised by this one? Because first it was Gallimore and then Bolton came, and I was like, okay, not only does this mean Channing Tindall likely made the roster, but that's a pretty solid linebacker that I'd like to get back on the practice squad that, based on the tape, it might be a lot harder than we think.
Yeah, man, when you have guys like Cam Brown, Grayson Murphy going on injured reserve, I was really kind of seeing the path for someone like Curtis Bolton to go in and make some noise. And what's interesting, too, is we've seen someone, we haven't seen Anthony Walker Jr., more like it. And that's kind of the reason why I'm like, all right, I can start to vibe with Curtis Bolton here. He's someone who's putting out a lot of film, man. Over 20 tackles this preseason. I thought he was just an impressive guy, but I think that just kind of signals that Miami's feeling pretty comfortable with Anthony Walker maybe not missing too much time, Channing Tindall being in the mix, and I think I just saw a starter giving Duke Riley a haircut on social media recently, so we should assume right then and there that he was a lock.
It was actually Odell Beckham Jr., so maybe there's yeah. So not only did you say starter and womp womp, but I think there's some kind of jinx, because not only was he sitting there vibing to Drake and now he's cutting Duke Riley's hair, like, Odell Beckham Jr., come on, man, stop your crazy ways.
Working through our list, I think we mentioned Jason Maitre. Josh, on the offensive line, Matthew Jones was one of the guys cut by the Dolphins, along with Chazen Hines. This is less about those guys, Josh. How many offensive linemen did the Miami Dolphins sign before... One sec here. September 4th. How many offensive linemen are the Dolphins signing?
At least one, right? They got to sign at least one.
I'm asking you.
Yeah, you always do. I was going to say 2, so I'll go with 2. But I just hope Jesse Davis got released. I know you saw Twitter talking about that. Could you imagine? Which, no disrespect to him. He can play guard, tackle. Could probably do worse than Jesse Davis, maybe.
The Dolphins are just like in such a awkward spot here where I'm really curious to see, Josh. The names are still coming out. Andrew Meyer is the one name I have highlighted here because you're at like a crossroads in the sense of, think about it. Aaron Brewer's been out, right? He's been dealing with an injury. Mike McDaniel seems fairly confident he's going to be back soon. Obviously, he's going to be, otherwise he would have been put on the PUP list. But Liam Eichenberg was out there as the team's starting center in a game Andrew Meyer played. So if you want to go all Pepe Sylvia on me, that's kind of interesting to me because if Andrew Meyer makes the team, what's changed in 2 weeks where he could have been someone that could have snapped 4 balls with Tua just to kind of get some sort of chemistry going? Or is it a scenario where Andrew Meyer is definitely not going to make the team, and they're maybe going to be searching for a center because you had Liam Eichenberg snapping the ball in that that second preseason game? I don't know, man. That's one guy who I think it could go either way, and I'm going to have questions in either direction they go.
Yeah, and shame on me. I think I wrote down the wrong name. I almost jinxed it and put Andrew Meyer in our rundown as him being the one that they cut. So I'm glad that he's still alive. I mean, as soon as we get off here, who knows what happens. But he is a younger player that I would like to see, them build up some type of center depth because right now, I mean, we're waiting to hear about the roster, right? Aaron Brewer, is he safe? Can we say he's safe yet, or are we still not? He should be safe. He should be starting week 1, Jake.
I don't know about week 1. He won't be on pup.
Okay, so all right, so we won't even know if that's the issue, but we have Liam Eichenberg behind him at center. We do not want to see him start at all. Hopefully, Andrew Meyer can step up. Intriguing name for sure.
Sorry, just trying to thumb through this list here. Another name we didn't mention, Josh, and I kind of, as it's happened, I kind of accepted it more. Chris Brooks was a guy the Dolphins decided to cut. He was still in concussion protocol. He's someone I hope the Dolphins can land on the practice squad, but man, this is someone who put 2 preseasons of great film out there. He was great with the Dolphins when he was active before last season's season-ending injury. I'd love to have him back on the practice squad, but I understand not using a spot on the 53-man roster on someone who just the injuries. I know it's all luck based, and football's a physical sport, so I'm not blaming anyone. But the best ability is availability. So I'm rooting for Chris Brooks. I'm hoping he lands on his feet, but I kind of understand it that you're going to keep someone like Jeff Wilson who can give you a little bit of everything, and you can trust him because he's been doing it for 47 years.
Yeah, and GM Houtz, I think, would have probably traded Jeff Wilson. Then we would have Chris Brooks getting hurt, and we would end up cutting him anyway. So now we'd be with a huge hole at running back. So I hope that one of those teams that Tom Pelissero, I think he said that once Chris Brooks is ready, he'll have some interest around the league. So hopefully the Dolphins reconsider at the time because, like you said, man, he looked like that legit thunder. He looked like that guy that could just run tough and get those sure yardage in those short situations that the Dolphins desperately need. So rest up, Chris Brooks. We'll see you soon.
So a little behind the scenes for everyone at home. You'll notice that Josh, if you're watching on 560 WQAM, now has a bunch of helmets behind him. So what has been a 20-minute podcast has been taken about an hour behind the scenes because we started going through some of the names the Dolphins released, but not the entire list. So we're now sitting here at 5:22 when the Miami Dolphins have announced the whole list, and oh my God, Josh, did we bury the lead? Eric Ezukama was released. Wow.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit flabbergasted. I mean, we know that there are some names that got released today around the NFL when you look at the receiving corps, but that's a guy that we know they invested time in. I mean, maybe he's banged up. Maybe that injury is a little bit more serious than we expected. But right now, the Dolphins have 4 wide receivers listed: Braxton Berrios, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Malik Washington. So, wow. Yeah, I'm glad we waited. So, yeah. And I'm going to have to throw this up on 560 WQA. We'll do the sponge job like 15. It was more like an hour, 13 minutes later. And it'll be like me up here and we'll continue. But yeah, the Eric Ezukama one definitely kind of shell shocked me. But that's the NFL, right, man? Only keeping 4 wide receivers, though. Who had that on their bingo card?
Wow, yeah, man. And it kind of speaks to what the Dolphins are going to hopefully do, getting the running backs and the tight ends more involved as receivers. So I'm going to go through the entire list here. Jaquan Burton, Jordan Colbert, Robert Cooper, Eric Ezukama, Mark Harley Jr., Chasen Hines, Xander Horvath, Daquan Jackson, Jaden Yankee, Isaiah Johnson, Matthew Jones, Jason Maitre, Byron Matos, Kyrick McGowan, defensive tackle Leonard Payne, safety Mark Perry, and tight end Hayden Rucci. The team also waived injured running back Chris Brooks, tackle Ryan Hayes, and wide receiver Braylon Sanders, and release linebacker Curtis Bolton, long snapper Blake Ferguson, defensive tackle Neville Gilmore, defensive tackle Jonathan Harris, defensive tackle Isaiah Mack, running back Anthony McFarland, and cornerback Nick Needham. Woof. Josh, Miami doesn't have a long snapper?
I mean, that's how I read that, right? Unless they have someone on the roster that can do it. But, I mean, yeah, in Madden, they're always tight ends, so maybe one of these tight ends can snap it. I'm joking, but yeah, man, I that came out of nowhere, right? No one really knew that was going to happen, but I'm definitely glad we waited, man, and glad we did this because as unfortunate it is for those players, you all hope that they bounce back, but dude, some of these definitely threw us off guard. So yeah, no long snapper right now. Maybe we're just not gonna punt.
Shout out Storm Duck. Shout out
Yeah, quack quack.
Julian Hill. Shout out Tanner Connor for
Yeah,
all making the roster. Josh, who am I missing here? Who else made the Miami Dolphins roster that were kind of on that? Shout out. Did I? Yeah, we. Who else?
Malik Washington, but I think we all kind of saw that one coming at this point, right?
Andrew Meyer. Shout out Andrew Meyer for making the Miami
Andrew
Dolphins.
Meyer. Yep, Andrew Meyer. Give him a Jack Driscoll. We saw that one coming. At least Aaron Brewer, he's not on PUP, so that's official now, right? What else we got? Channing Tindall. Oh, Channing Tindall. Silly us. Shout out Channing Tindall because he had a hell of a preseason. So Patrick McMorris is on there. I think we all speculated that. Elijah Campbell. How bad was this hiccuping? Because I just saw you go like into a third dimension.
Oh, dude, I didn't even hear any difference, so I think we're good.
Perfect.
Before we wrap up here, Josh, there's a lot of names moving around. There's a lot of shell shock. You mentioned it. I'm very happy we waited to digest the rest of this podcast. And one of the things a lot of people are saying, and it's important to keep in mind because it's true, 53-man roster sounds fun, and it's rolls right off your tongue. But the NFL teams are working with closer to a 70-man roster when you consider the 16-man practice squad and the fact that you can have some veterans on that practice squad. It's not necessarily a developmental roster where it's guys you're not going to see playing. So next up for the Dolphins, now that you have 53 guys under contract, it's about building out that 16-player practice squad. So Josh, I just kind of wanted to spend a couple minutes here and look at what last year's practice squad did, just so we could kind of get an idea of what are we getting out of these players, what can we expect, how many of them we're going to see. So, Josh, I'd love to get your feedback as I go through this entire list of Miami's initial 2023 practice squad. Chase Winovich, Rashard Lawrence, Nick Bowers, Riley Webb, James Tunstall, Darrington Evans, Josh Kalu, Chasen Hines, Braylon Sanders, AJ Johnson, Deshaun Hand, Tanner Connor, Randy Charlton, Alama Aluve, Cameron Good, and Ethan Bonner. Josh, what goes to your head?
First thing is I'm impressed by, the development from Ethan Bonner, Tanner Connor, Cameron Good. I know that they feel, good things about him. So it's nice to see him kind of put these players and let them develop and learn the system. But overall, I guess the biggest thing I see is a bunch of guys that, maybe us fans were kind of hyped about at the time. I mean, Chase Winovich was a player that Dolphin fans already put in the Hall of Fame at the time. And I'll leave it at that. Darrington Evans, I remember him at one point being a deep dive dynasty stash. So definitely some players here that stood out. I guess I'm just hoping that this year's we definitely see guys like we definitely see the Dolphins continue to develop guys like Chase and Hines and, maybe some of these players that they let go, a Curtis Bolton or, whoever it may be. I mean, that's what this practice squad's for. And I think in years past, never really got utilized this way. So kudos to the Dolphins coaching staff for developing some of these players and those players for stepping up.
Some great acorns. You mentioned Ethan Bonner. Cameron Good, his season-ending leg injury at the end of last year, he was making some plays. He had some opportunities when you saw guys like Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb go down. Nick Bowers never rang a bell to me. So, that's kind of the thing here, too, where, there are guys like Ethan Bonner who you're going to see a little bit, and they're going to develop into starters. And there are going to be guys like you are, pounding the table for players X, Y, and Z for so long, and all of a sudden they're not even on the team anymore. They're not doing too much. Josh, of these guys who are still with the team focusing on Tanner Connor, Ethan Bonner, Cameron Good, who do you expect to have the biggest impact for the Miami Dolphins this season?
I guess that'd be between Tanner Connor and Ethan Bonner. And I guess when we're sitting here, I know it feels like forever ago when we started recording that first episode, right? The first part of this episode, Jake. But I think we were talking about the secondary feeling uneasy. So I hope it's Ethan Bonner. I hope he steps up and takes that next step and elevates to that player that we hear in camp, right? Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill gushing about what he can do. So let's see Ethan Bonner bring that to the live game action. But Tanner Connor, man, we saw some of that yak. So I don't think there's a wrong answer with either of them.
When you look through the guys the Dolphins have cut already, Josh, who's one of the? Is anyone you hoping lands on that list and can kind of find their path at playing time? I just instantly go homer and say that Eric Ezukama is going to find his way back on this roster. The Dolphins only have 4 wide receivers. Taj Washington's not going to play this year. Odell Beckham's on PUP. I mean, I think Eric Ezukama still has a place in this league, and I'd love to see what could have happened if we shake the crystal ball and he wasn't wearing that boot for Game 3, because he was a featured part of that offense throughout the preseason. And I just think let me put it this way, is there any chance he makes it to the practice squad?
That's why I'm sitting here. You're saying that, and that's what I keep thinking. Like, that's what concerns me with any of these players, and especially in Eric Ezukama. I think he's from a 3rd-round pick or a 4th-round pick. I always get that confused, but you know what I mean? He's a guy that the Dolphins have invested time in. We see him at times when he's out there, the preseason guy that he is. So I'm hoping he somehow stumbles onto that practice squad. I guess the players that stand out to me, I guess we talked about Chris Brooks. We all like what he can do as far as running the ball. We like the development that we've seen over the seasons. I said Curtis Bolton as well, and there was one more that really stood out to me. Give me a second. Mark Perry, and even Leonard Payne, right? There were some nice interior guys that they could develop. So whoever Anthony Weaver wants, let him go out there and pick some guys. Let Danny Crossman get some guys, and let the offense get some guys. And let's hope that in a couple of years we're talking about the next Tanner Connor, and some of these other guys that are hopefully going to make a splash in 2024 and beyond.
Famous last words, but I think Hayden Rucci might be a guy who's safe. One thing people seem to forget sometimes, especially when it's about drafting a tight end, is it takes tight ends, man, a long time to develop. You got to learn blocking schemes. You got to learn route running. You're learning so many different positions, where I think Hayden Rucci could be one of those guys who hopefully, famous last words again, knock on wood, he won't get claimed, and maybe that's one of the guys we could see maybe next preseason really start to kick the door down, develop into one of those players. Another name I kind of like, man, is Jaquan Burton, somebody who came in as a wide receiver. He was forced to play running back in Game 2. His stats weren't great, but the best ability is availability, and if Mike McDaniel sees someone who can catch the football and run with the football, they're Deebo Samuel, so we should keep him around.
Yeah, they're always Deebo Samuel. As soon as they take that end around, like Malik Washington, I already named him Jarvis Landry, so that might be a little different. Another name I just saw here, and again, it goes back to us recording the first, Nick Needham, right? He's that name that if he can somehow get there, that'd be absolutely perfect. Jake, I know that we're getting ready to wrap this up, but have you looked around and seen any names that really stuck out to you as far as, some of those guys that maybe the Dolphins could poach? Because we're sitting here talking about 4 wide receivers. We like some of these guys on the practice squad, but, as soon as we record this podcast, man, they're probably going to make some other roster moves, acquiring players, looking at some acorns. So were there any names that really stood out to you that we should keep an eye on over the next few days that, we might be on here again talking about very soon?
Ben DiNucci. No, I'm kidding. I'm 100% kidding. But I do think the Dolphins, I think the Dolphins are going to be chasing another quarterback. There was some issues with how the emergency quarterback rules were developed. Basically, the NFL proposed a rule, and it was declined by the NFLPA. So this is from Barry Jackson of the Miami Herald. Practice squad quarterbacks can be elevated 3 times each year, and it must happen before the game. AKA, you must know in advance when both of your quarterbacks on the 53 will be injured. So it's not like you can do I think it's hockey, you can just pick someone metaphorically, take someone off the street and throw them in the goal to be your goalie. This is something that you have to know ahead of time. So if they're not one of those players activated before the game, they can't go out there and they got to count as one of those players. Makes it a little tougher. We were kind of wondering maybe this is a way the Dolphins could work around and not add a 3rd quarterback. But Josh, it seems like Miami or any team that wants to have the safety of 3 quarterbacks will need to keep all 3 on the 53-man roster if you're not worried, or unless you want to be worried about them being poached. CJ Beathard, he spent time in San Francisco. Kyle Shanahan, he was someone, I think he was released by the Jags, and he was with the 49ers 2017 through 2020. So that's someone I think of who maybe you could stick him on the practice squad and he won't get poached, something like that. That's probably where my first thought goes. Josh, you going quarterback, or do you have a different position in mind?
Yeah, I'd love to find, a nice interior offensive lineman somewhere else or a defensive back thing coming, but I think we're going to be looking at the quarterbacks, receiver maybe. Terrence Marshall was a name that really stuck out to me. He's a bigger body guy that, a lot of, again, fantasy football scope. A lot of people were pretty high on him, that can maybe come in here and add an element to this passing game, because to me, it looks like the Dolphins are definitely going to sign a passing guy, a pass catcher. But I would love to bring in a developmental guy. I don't know if it's Bethard, but, somebody else that the Dolphins could mold and, to go and gets tough, you throw him out there. But they have to be looking at this thing that if Tua goes down, it's all going down. So I do have Barry Jackson. He tweeted out Blake Ferguson and Jonathan Harris end up being the two mystery late afternoon Dolphin cuts. As noted earlier, center Andrew Meyer and Storm Duck both made the team. So I guess that was what we were waiting on, Jake. We sat here, SpongeBob, waiting 30 minutes, but we got through it, man. The 53-man. It says 53-man roster, but I did a quick count, and there might only be 52 on there. So it would make sense needing a long snapper, right? But yeah, we'll see.
I love ending a podcast on long snapper news. Thank you all so much for listening to Another Dolphins podcast. Thank you for bearing with us. As we wanted to get you guys out a podcast early, we wanted to make sure we got all the news. Dolphins made us wait a half an hour, so thank you for putting up with us and dealing with us. Thank you so much for listening to Another Dolphins podcast. We will be back later this week with Kat to wrap up some of the biggest stories of the offseason as we finally prepare for the Jacksonville Jaguars week 1 of the 2024 NFL football season. Thank you all so much for listening to Another Dolphins podcast. We will be back soon, but until then,
What's up?